Originally, my topic was going to be why is international cooperation so important today? Well, I actually, as I started to sit down and do this presentation, I decided that that was perhaps not a good topic for now because it's apparent to anybody that international cooperation is now important. But the budget and program environment is so unstable, not only here, but Europe is having its own financial problems. The space program looks to be reorganizing in Japan, and they have enormous problems of their own. And so it's a very unsettled state. So going beyond the truisms and the fact that international cooperation is an important part of the President's national space policy, it seemed like we could maybe perhaps use this time for something a little more practical. Excuse the title. I used it as a working title, and I never thought of anything better. So what I'm going to talk about is what is international cooperation at NASA, very briefly, and then talk about some of the machinery that you're going to encounter as investigator teams working with international partners from a headquarters perspective, which is obviously the perspective that I've got. International cooperation at NASA is a big thing. It's been going on since 1958 when the Space Agency was founded. There have been a vast number of agreements struck with many, many countries. Science is a big player in the international agreement area. There are 500 active international agreements in the agency today, and 2/3 of these are in the science area. And one of the reasons for that is because there are so many different missions and so many different subfields and so on that there are just a lot of partnerships, and each partnership has to have an agreement. And you can see there that many of them are the ones that you would immediately assume are key partners: France, Germany, ESA, Japan, so forth and so on. Now, what is NASA International Cooperation Policy? This is something that was enshrined in about 1959. I found a summary of it it was in a paper presented at the second Coast Guard meeting in The Hague in 1959. But these are basically the rules, the general policies that have been in place pretty much unchanged during between then and now, as different as the current environment is. These principles remain the same. We usually do business with governments because we're a government, and usually a lot of money is involved. Occasionally we do agreements with the university if there's no government, but usually it's government to government. Number two, we are not the State Department. We don't always get to do exactly what we want. Sometimes the State Department, national foreign policy, has an impact on these things. The decadal surveys, very valid from a scientific point of view, but there are other factors that come into play, and some of them are diplomatic. Projects and partnerships, how are they characterized? Well, we do it because of scientific or technical merit. Of course, in the science program, it's scientific merit, which is the gold standard. We don't do it because it's a foreign policy thing. Strictly, I mean, there are things like USAID whose job is to do foreign policy, but that's not us. We're a scientific and technical agency. It's got to be something that demonstrates a benefit to NASA. We don't do things that don't benefit our program and the expenditure of our appropriated funds. We're careful about technology transfer. You'll hear a lot about that from Paula. It's important to have clearly defined interfaces. This is something as flight projects, that is something that you will be very concerned about to make your projects manageable in terms of schedule and technical organization and communications. And finally, we have international agreements, and that's what the bulk of my talk is going to be about, how that happens, at least from a headquarters perspective, so that when you're confronted by it, you'll understand what's going on behind the curtain. And finally, the no exchange of funds is a critical provision. The space station has been a notable exception. Back when the partnership was first struck with the Russians, it had to do with making sure that they were not making weapons for other people. But in general, there's no exchange of funds. Okay, so now I'm going to go to my general topic, which is who does what to whom and getting international agreements and these partnerships formalized. And these lists of people and connections and so on are not complete. I tried to hit the highlights. Here are the key players in this little drama. You'll see that I'm going to focus mostly on the role of the program executives. Principal investigator, you all know what the principal investigator is supposed to do. The program executive is really the key interface between the project and headquarters functions, and that's what I'm going to talk about in more detail. I don't mean to slight the program scientists. It's just that they're not in the main line of these processes during the development phase. After the mission's in operation, the program scientist gets to be a little more important in these interactions. The Office of Interagency and International Relations is an absolutely key player. They have an enormous role in this, as you'll see in just a moment. And finally, the project office, I felt it was key to have it on the chart, but I mean, it obviously has a huge responsibility in terms of making the project go for the principal investigator. So this is sort of an important chart. It's very schematic, but what it tries to do is it tries to emphasize something that you see with that very big black arrow. On the left are the things that are happening outside the agency, the principal investigator, the project team, and the program office. On the right side of the diagram are NASA headquarters, Science Mission Directorate. And I don't mean to disparage the role of the program scientist and who he or she talks to, but the real thing I want to emphasize here is the interaction between the project and the program executive. There are a lot of things that go on at headquarters that don't have anything to do with science or engineering. And the program executive is your window into all of that. In particular, you'll see that the little arrow pointing down to the Office of International and Interagency Relations and the Office of the General Counsel. I want to make a quick historical comment here. When I came to NASA in 1998, there was, as now, a lot of international activity, a lot of international agreements being developed, and the situation was a little bit chaotic. The projects were calling the External Relations Office directly. We had occasional calls from the principal investigators. The people in the Science Mission Directorate didn't always know what conversations were going on. And so one of the things that we've evolved to over the last decade is to make sure that there's a sort of a single access point for the processes that are involved in getting international agreements done, and also for a bunch of other things too as well. You see them along the right. Division management, resources management, that's the people that actually count the money in our office, public affairs, and then there's the ever-present interactions with the Office of the Chief Engineer and Safety and Mission Assurance. Once again, note, I haven't tried to show all the arrows because they go everywhere. International agreements. So what about these agreements? I'm going to focus in on international agreements now. Our legal authority flows from the Space Act of 1958. NASA's very fortunate to have the legal authority to have its own international agreements. Many of our foreign partners don't, and even other agencies in the federal government that deal with foreign parties a lot don't have it. But we're actually able to have our own international agreements. That doesn't mean we can do them without consultation across the government. We do have the statutory authority to execute them. And so what are the purposes of agreements? Well, obviously to define the technical responsibilities. There's a lot of legal provisions. I'll show you those in a minute. And to make sure that export control is documented and done properly. Now, on the program executive side, those are the folks that you will be dealing with primarily. It's to define the respective technical contributions. The agreement has to include that. And the only way that we know at headquarters what those are is because the program executive tells us what they are, and the program executive finds out from talking to the project and the principal investigator and whoever else is necessary on the other side of the fence. Also, the program executive is key in helping understand who on the other side of the fence we should be talking to. And then the program executive works very closely with the Office of Interagency and International Relations. I just call it OER, External Relations, the old name, to assemble the document, the agreement document. Now, what does OIR do? External Relations. Well, they actually put the draft agreement together using the program executive inputs. And they route the thing through headquarters. There's a big concurrence loop. Everybody has to see this thing and agree that it's got all the provisions that we need to have from the various points of view. And then oftentimes there's State Department clearance that's required. And sometimes there's an interagency clearance procedure as well, where the agreement actually gets handed around other federal agencies to make sure that their equities are being observed. And then finally, the External Relations has the authority, the delegated authority from the administrator to negotiate and conclude the agreements. Now, by negotiate, I don't mean like negotiating the technical details. That has to be done by the project and with the program executive, but it means all the other stuff. This is what an international agreement has in it. The program executive's piece of it are the responsibilities, the technical responsibilities, and in other words, we do this and you do that. Okay, that's what that is. And points of contact. Who are the administrative and technical points of contact with a foreign partner? And you see all this other stuff. Now, I left some items out of this. There's sort of a cookbook for these things. I didn't put everything on there because some of it didn't apply. But you can sort of see what the stuff that's in there. There's a purpose of cooperation, responsibility, rights and resulting data, financial arrangements, no exchange of funds typically, almost exclusively actually. Points of contact, I mentioned that, liability and risk of loss. There's a huge liability clause. I don't know how foreigners are actually able to read these because I read it and I speak English. I've been speaking it for many years and I can't make much sense out of it myself. but it's in there. Registration of space objects. Who registered under treaty? Transfer of goods and technical data. That has to do with export control and intellectual property rights. Intellectual property rights. Who actually benefits discovered? Release of results and public information. Exchange of personnel and access to facilities, if there's going to be people going back and forth. Customs clearance. Who pays duty when stuff gets shipped back and forth? Each party is supposed to get not levy duties, but if you levy duties, you have to pay the duties. Ownership of equipment, consultation dispute, anyway, so forth and so on. Choice of law. That's something important. I'll come back to that in one of the next charts. So that's kind of what goes into one of these things. These documents range from 5, 6, 7 pages up to a dozen, 2 dozen pages long, depending on how much of this stuff is in there. And as you can imagine, each one of these has an owner at NASA headquarters, and it schleps through the system collecting signatures for each one. So what is the process? The process we have at headquarters, and you may see this as project managers and project team members, is the way it starts is that we need to develop the NASA does and the partner does stuff. The program executive will talk to external relations, say, this is coming at you. Then the program executive has to create a record and a tracking database. That's the way in which our Science Mission Directorate tasks external relations to develop an agreement. The program executive now provides the detailed we do, they do. Then external relations determines the type of agreement and the choice of law. The choice of law is pretty interesting. Most of our agreements are under international law, but agreements that are done under international law have to go to the State Department for scrutiny and possible interagency concurrence. If we can sign it under U.S. law, it goes much faster. But some foreign partners won't accept U.S. law. They say, well, what about Mozambique law? What's the matter with our law? So we get into that do loop. But it's more convenient if we can do it under U.S. law. It's becoming increasingly difficult to do business that way. And then we start doing periodic agreements as it works through the system. And 5, 6, 7, and 8 show you what OIR does. It creates that agreement, all those spare parts, lashes it all together, sends it around headquarters, sends it to the State Department if it needs to, then it conducts the negotiations on the provisions, particularly the non-technical ones, as needed, and then we'll execute the agreement by their signature is what makes it binding. So what are the challenges? I've got just 2 charts left. So what are the challenges that we face at headquarters to get these things done for you? Number 1, technical negotiations. Usually it's not a problem with, who's going to do which test and who's going to provide which parts. That usually seems to be worked out pretty well. But we get into stuff like public access to data. Particularly in the earth sciences, some countries think they're going to make money selling earth observing data, and they want to form public-private partnerships, and they don't want to have an open data policy, so we get negotiations there, things of that nature. Choice of law, I mentioned that. Questions of partner legal competence. There have been cases where our lawyers don't think that their agency has legal authority to sign, and then we get in an argument with a foreign country or whether they can sign agreements. It's supernatural. OIR has a lot of other stuff going on, so this has to compete. Concurrence routing in headquarters. Occasionally these things get lost. I hate to admit it. State Department clearance. This can take a long time. They've got a lot of stuff going on over there, and they're understaffed. So what is the elapsed time for partner processing? Some of our partners that we haven't done business with a lot don't understand the provisions, and it takes a long time. And a lot of times they have their own approval processes, which can be time consuming. Bottom line, I went back and looked for agreements concluded since January 1 for new agreements, not extensions of old ones, and found that the average time for an agreement to get completed from when it was first identified is 312 days, and the worst case is 1,806. It's with the Italians on Planck, and I don't think it had any particularly unusual problems, but if you get any of these unusual problems, they can take well over 1,000 days. That hopefully won't be the case for anybody here. Last chart. Oops, that's me. Takeaway. International agreements are important. You're going to need them. Number 2, you don't get to do it yourself. That authority is vested with the external relations at NASA headquarters. Number 3, believe it or not, we are here to help. And number 4, your program executive is your friend. He or she is a person that's going to stick up for your project at headquarters. They know what to do and who they need to talk to get it done. And working closely with them and making sure they're fully informed can reduce confusion, save you time, and when we get to Paula Geis, you'll see how they might even be able to keep you out of trouble. Thank you.